China has ordered the US to close its consulate in Chengdu. It's the latest development in an increasingly tense diplomatic spat between the two nations. Beijing called this a necessary response after the US ordered China to close its own consulate in Houston earlier this week. Washington is accusing Chinese agents of trying to steal medical research in Texas and other sensitive data. China says the closure of its consulate was unjustified and has called on the US to reverse the decision. Diplomatic relations between the two countries have sunk to their lowest level in decades over a range of issues, including trade, the handling of the pandemic, and spying accusations. To talk about these fraught relations, I'm now joined by Professor Rana Mitter. He's the director of the China Institute, or the China Centre at the University of Oxford. Thanks very much for speaking with us here on Euronews. We've got some observers who are saying that this is an all-time low in diplomatic relations between the two countries. What do you think? Just how bad is this?
It's pretty bad, Oliver, and I'd say it's certainly the worst in the reform era, by which we mean the era in which China started opening up to the world after the late 1970s. It's certainly worse than after the Tiananmen Square killings of 1989, largely because essentially China and the US appear to be on essentially a course of confrontation in which currently the US government, partly because, of course, there are electoral considerations at stake, is trying to pressure China as hard as possible and also bring Western allies on side to make it more of a joint effort.
But what does it actually achieve, closing these consulates? Is it all just for show, so that your home audience, the people that you vote for in the country, that you're trying to be strong, that you're trying to take decisive action? Or does it actually hamper the activities of the foreign states in which these countries are based?
My own sense is that actually it's a very symbolic gesture and not necessarily one that looks very strategic. The fact is that consulates of many countries are used almost certainly as intelligence bases. That's true for countries including China, the US, and other European countries, I'm sure. But the thing is that closing down these consulates doesn't necessarily actually repair the overall diplomatic situation between the two sides. And right now, there are a whole variety of things, everything from the potential trade war between China and the US to actual military conflict in areas like the South China Sea or over Taiwan that are really looming. And I think closing down diplomatic institutions is not going to be a very helpful way to try and sort those issues out.
Now, on Thursday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was calling into question the usefulness of normalising ties with China over the past 50 years. It seems incredible that we hear things like that being said. If this continues to deteriorate, could there be a complete severance of ties, or will there always be a need to have dialogue between the two nations?
A complete severance between the two looks almost impossible to achieve. Just off the top of my head, China owns huge amounts of what are called US treasuries, in other words, US government debt. China is highly dependent on Intel and American companies for microprocessors in its computers, but American companies and European ones too, like Nokia and Ericsson, are dependent on manufacturing in China and those supply chains. Redistributing all of those supply chains to cut China out will be an immensely lengthy, immensely expensive and highly hostile process, which I think both sides would step back from. I don't think it's practical.
Rana, you've been observing China for quite a while. What are your predictions? Where do you see relations going from here?
I think that for the next 3 months, they're going to be very tense because the Trump administration's attempt to get President Trump re-elected is going to sit very heavily on pushing hard on China because there are other domestic issues, which I think viewers will know about, that mean that his domestic opinion poll ratings are dropping. However, in the period beyond that, regardless of whether it's President Trump or President Biden, I suspect that all sides, the Europeans, the Americans and the Chinese, are going to have to recalibrate relations. China has also been very confrontational on issues like the Hong Kong security law, internal minority rights, and of course the South China Sea. And in a weird way, the Trump administration's behavior in closing the consulate is giving China cover. If President Biden gets into office, I think that cover will disappear and China will have to moderate its diplomacy with the world.
Rana Mitter, interesting times ahead for sure. Thanks very much for joining us here from the University of Oxford.